Roars of engines filled the air as roughly 1,000 motorcyclists rolled up to the celebration of life for Rick Carnello at a Surrey banquet hall.
They say the desert remembers everything. It remembers the heat, the blood, and the sound of engines roaring across the horizon. But some stories are too strange to be remembered, so they become legends instead. This one started as a rumor, a whisper drifting through truck stops and biker bars from El Paso to Corpus Christi. It said that the Hells Angels, the same club that once ruled America's outlaw highways, had done the unthinkable. They had gone to war with the cartels. Not with protests, not with politics, but with fire. The story was simple, brutal, and unbelievable. A coordinated strike on multiple cartel labs along the Texas border. A billion-dollar operation turned to ash overnight. No arrests, no witnesses, no survivors, and not a single agency took credit. To this day, no one really knows what happened that night in Texas. But the deeper you go, the more the facts and the myths start to blur. What's left is something between history and folklore, something people call the Texas Reckoning. It didn't start with the DEA or the ATF or Homeland Security. It started with a man named Charles Pee Wee Goldsmith. If you've spent any time around the biker world, that name means something. A veteran of the old-school Hells Angels, a man who lived through the chaos of the 1970s and came out the other side with scars and stories too heavy to tell. Pee Wee wasn't a criminal mastermind. He wasn't a politician. He was just an old biker with a code. The kind of man who still believed that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. And somewhere along the line, Pee Wee saw that code slipping away. By 2023, the Hells Angels weren't the same as they used to be. The club had fractured, its older members fading into retirement while younger riders got tangled up in cartel networks. Guns, drugs, money. The same poison that had once been forbidden by the old charter now flowed freely across state lines. Pee Wee called it a disease eating the Brotherhood from the inside out. Then something happened that crossed a line. According to multiple sources, none of them willing to go on record, a young angel from Arizona got caught in a cartel dispute near Laredo. The story goes that he refused to cooperate, refused to pay tribute on a shipment that wasn't even his. Days later, his family was found dead in a burned-out trailer on the edge of town. The message was clear. The old codes meant nothing anymore. And for Pee Wee, that was it. Enough was enough. He started making calls, quiet ones. Old friends from different chapters, San Francisco, Vegas, Milwaukee, Minnesota. Men who still wore the patch not for profit, but for pride. Men who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to protect. The plan wasn't written down. It didn't need to be. In the world of the Angels, trust is currency, and silence is armor. All anyone knows for sure is that, by late March, something began to move in the Texas desert. Locals near Zapata County noticed unmarked trucks driving without lights along old oil roads at night. Ranchers said they saw motorcycle convoys cutting across dry riverbeds under moonlight. Power grids in 3 small towns went down simultaneously. 2 hours of total blackout, followed by static across every police channel in the county. Then came the fires. Satellite images later showed multiple heat signatures blooming like sparks across a 200-mile stretch of borderland. Whatever happened that night wasn't random. It was synchronized. 8 separate cartel labs, gone. By morning, all that was left were craters, twisted steel, and silence. No bodies, no shootouts, no news conferences. Just the faint smell of smoke drifting north across the border. For nearly a week, nothing appeared in the media. Not a single outlet mentioned it. The first report came from a small local newspaper in Corpus Christi. The headline was blunt. Unexplained explosions near border linked to biker activity, sources say. The piece was live for less than 2 days before it vanished from the site. The editor later admitted he got a phone call, someone claiming to be from federal law enforcement, asking him to take it down for national security reasons. That's when the online theories began. Some said it was a rogue DEA unit using biker proxies to strike cartel supply lines off the books. Others said the Angels had done it themselves, revenge for the murdered family, or maybe for a business deal gone bad. But there was one theory that spread faster than the rest, that it wasn't revenge at all, it was a reckoning. A cleansing. Pee Wee had once said in an interview, "Brotherhood ain't about crime. It's about cleaning up what others are too afraid to face." At the time, nobody thought much of it. Now, it read like a mission statement. Within weeks, fragments of evidence began surfacing online. Grainy phone videos showing motorcycles moving in formation through the desert at night, blurred photos of burned compounds near Laredo, shipping manifests that stopped mid-transaction on the same date, March 27, 2024. A Reddit account under the name AFE 1979 began posting cryptic coordinates and coded messages about routes cleared and supply lines erased. The post disappeared within hours, but screenshots spread like wildfire. Federal agencies stayed silent. Every FOIA request came back the same. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of any such operations. By summer, cartel production in northern Mexico had dropped nearly 40%. Billions in drug revenue vanished overnight. Analysts couldn't explain it. Officials didn't want to. But in the quiet corners of the biker world, something was shifting. Charters that had been rivals for decades began cooperating. They called it the peace season. Charity rides, food drives, disaster relief convoys. On the surface, it looked like good PR. But insiders said it was more than that. It was solidarity. A silent pact between men who had seen what the reckoning could do and didn't want to see it again. Meanwhile, the federal government scrambled to regain control of the narrative. The DEA and ATF held joint press conferences denying any involvement. They called the rumors grossly exaggerated. But reporters noticed something strange. The agencies never actually denied that something had happened. They just denied knowing who did it. Then came the leak. An independent investigative group calling itself Desert Eye released satellite images of 8 burnt structures along the Texas-Mexico border. Each location matched known cartel-owned properties. The group's report concluded that the sites hadn't exploded. They'd been dismantled systematically using industrial equipment. It wasn't a raid, it was a cleanup. Within 72 hours, Desert Eye's website went dark. Its founders vanished from social media. But the numbers didn't lie. Over $10 billion in narcotics output disappeared from cartel networks within 3 months. Smuggling routes went quiet. Violence in border towns dropped by half. It was as if an invisible hand had wiped the map clean. And that's when Washington really started to panic. An internal memo leaked to journalists under the title, "The Rogue Alliance" described a civilian network with paramilitary discipline responsible for disruptive anti-cartel actions. It never used the term Hell's Angels, but the description was obvious. The memo's final line was chilling. If such a network exists, it operates with precision and planning comparable to federal task forces. Around that time, Pee Wee Goldsmith resurfaced, briefly. A reporter caught him outside a gas station in Arizona. When asked about the Texas rumors, he smiled, lit a cigarette, and said, "Some messes clean themselves up." Then he rode off. That clip went viral. Overnight, Pee Wee became the face of something he'd never confirmed doing. By autumn, the reckoning had become myth. TikTok and Reddit were flooded with grainy footage, interviews, speculation. Podcasters called it the night the Outlaws did the government's job. Mainstream news outlets tried to debunk it, but every attempt only made the story spread faster. Even economists started noticing the fallout. Legitimate freight traffic surged across southern Texas, replacing black market shipments with real commerce. Small towns that had been ghost zones for years suddenly came back to life. Nobody could explain it, but everyone could feel it. The air was different, safer. Then, in January, a think tank released a paper titled Parallel Security Networks. The report analyzed the reckoning as if it were an experiment in decentralized order, a real-world case of civilians restoring balance where institutions had failed. The paper's conclusion was both controversial and prophetic. Order built on trust may outperform order built on bureaucracy. Cable news had a field day. Some called it vigilantism. Others called it patriotism, but the people living along the border didn't care what you called it. They just called it peace. No more gunfights. No more missing children. No more midnight convoys of trucks disappearing into cartel territory. Whether by design or accident, the reckoning had worked. And yet, no one took credit. No one ever does when legends are involved. Then came the video. In April, a 2-minute clip appeared on a small video sharing site. One camera, one man sitting beside a motorcycle under a neon sign that said house service. His voice was gravelly, but calm. "I've been hearing stories about ghosts in Texas," he said. "If you find one, tell him he left the place cleaner than he found it." Before the clip could be downloaded, the account vanished. Analysts confirmed the voice was Pee Wee's. After that, the conversation changed. People stopped asking if it happened. They started asking why. Was it vengeance, justice, or just the last stand of an old code that refused to die? Months passed, and the story of the Texas reckoning began to shift from newsfeed to folklore. For most people, it was just another strange tale from the borderlands, one that flickered across their screens for a few weeks and then disappeared into the endless churn of modern life. But for those who lived closest to the line, the truckers, the ranchers, the local cops, and the families who'd spent years caught between fear and survival, it was different. They could feel it. The nights were quieter now. The air smelled different. The tension that had once hung over their towns like smoke had finally begun to fade. In the tiny border town of San Ignacio, a woman named Marisol ran a roadside diner where truckers still stopped to grab coffee before heading north. Every few weeks, a group of riders would show up. Never the same faces twice, but always respectful. Always quiet. They never wore colors, but everyone knew. You could tell by the way they carried themselves, by the glint of old metal on their jackets, by the silence that followed when they walked through the door. One night, Marisol asked one of them if he'd ever heard of the reckoning. The man smiled and said, "Ma'am, sometimes stories ain't meant to be believed, they're meant to be felt." Then he paid for everyone's meal and rode away. Those words stuck with her. Felt, not believed. Maybe that's what this whole story had become. A feeling that the impossible might not be as far away as people think. That when systems fail, sometimes ordinary people fill the space between right and wrong. By late the next year, think tanks, journalists, and even law enforcement agencies were still trying to make sense of what had happened. Committees formed. Papers were written. None of them could agree on whether the reckoning was real or not, but across America, people were already treating it like legend. Graffiti appeared in cities, a winged skull and the words respect, loyalty, honor. Biker rallies played tribute songs. Small towns near the border began holding annual rides to honor the guardians of the desert. For the first time in decades, bikers, the men once seen as outlaws, were being treated as heroes. And somewhere, watching all of this unfold from a quiet garage in Arizona, Pee Wee Goldsmith must have smiled. He'd never confirmed anything, never taken credit, but in his silence, there was a kind of pride. The old guard had done one last ride, not for money, not for power, but for something far simpler, for a promise they'd made to each other decades ago. Never let outsiders define who we are. He was seen one last time that winter, at a charity ride for veterans. He was older now, slower, but still carried that unmistakable energy, that sense that behind the wrinkles and weathered hands was someone who'd lived 1,000 lives. When a young reporter asked him about the reckoning, he laughed and said, "If you gotta ask if it happened, then maybe you already know the answer." Then he put on his helmet and disappeared into the line of bikes heading out across the desert highway. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. Over the following years, strange things began to happen around the border. Abandoned cartel compounds were quietly bulldozed and turned into farmland. Families who had fled years before returned to rebuild. Small logistics companies sprang up in old smuggling towns, all locally owned, all legitimate, all strangely well-funded. Economists called it the quiet boom. Nobody could trace where the investment came from, but if you looked closely at the company logos, some carried small symbols, subtle, almost invisible. A skull with a wing, a patch of red and white. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Meanwhile, a new generation of bikers started adopting what they called the code. They didn't see themselves as criminals or rebels, but as keepers of a tradition. They rode not to defy the law, but to remind the world that loyalty still had meaning. Clubs that once fought bitter turf wars began working together, building food drives, supporting rehab programs, raising money for veterans. It wasn't about charity, it was about balance. A quiet statement that you could live by an outlaw's code without being an outlaw. When journalists tried to tie this movement back to the Texas Reckoning, no one would confirm it. Every answer was the same. That story belongs to the road, and maybe that's how it should be. Because the truth about legends is that once they leave your hands, they belong to everyone. In Mexico, the cartels never officially acknowledged the loss. They simply adapted, reorganized, and changed their roots. But their tone changed. Gone were the public threats, the flagrant displays of power. Instead, a kind of uneasy truce settled in. One Mexican journalist put it best in an editorial that quietly disappeared a week after publication. The message was not written in words. It was written in silence. Someone reminded the monsters that they could bleed. Back in the States, universities began teaching the reckoning in sociology classes, not as history, but as modern mythology. Professors debated whether it represented moral anarchy or a new form of grassroots order. One wrote, "When faith in systems fails, people invent their own heroes. Whether real or imagined, they fill the void left by broken institutions." For many, the reckoning became that symbol, proof that somewhere, even in the shadows, decency still fought back. Years later, a young documentary filmmaker retraced the routes supposedly used that night. He found nothing, no wreckage, no markers, no evidence. But at a lonely crossroads south of Laredo, he came across a rusted road sign with a single phrase spray-painted across it in faded red letters. "The road still rides." He said when the wind blew, the sign creaked like it was trying to speak. That moment became the closing shot of his film. When it premiered online, viewers flooded the comment section with stories from their own towns. Rumors of midnight convoys, unmarked bikes, or border stations that suddenly got quiet one week in 2024. Nobody could verify a thing, but everyone swore it happened. And in a way, that's all a legend ever needs: belief. Because belief keeps memory alive, and memory keeps order in a world where chaos never sleeps. Somewhere, out in the desert, the night hums with the faint echo of engines. The headlights are dim now, but steady. The riders move as one, silent as ghosts, bound not by law or fame, but by a simple truth: you don't need permission to do what's right. The road stretches endlessly ahead, a ribbon of dust and heat leading nowhere and everywhere. Maybe they're still out there, watching the line, guarding the border that history forgot. Or maybe they've become something else, a story we tell ourselves when the world feels too broken to fix. Either way, they serve the same purpose. They remind us that loyalty still matters, that courage still counts, that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't come with applause or medals, just a clean conscience and the sound of the wind behind you. The Texas Reckoning may never appear in any official record. There'll be no memorials, no textbooks, no government reports. But legends don't need signatures, they just need to be told. So if you ever find yourself driving that long stretch of highway south of San Antonio, look out toward the horizon at dusk. If you listen close, you might hear it: the low rumble of engines carried on the wind, the faint echo of a brotherhood that refused to die. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what Pee Wee meant when he said, "Some messes clean themselves up." Because the truth about legends is this: they don't end when the road does. They ride on, forever. Years turned into decades. Time, as it always does, began to sand down the sharp edges of the story. The world moved on. New headlines, new crises, new villains. But in the corners of the country where the desert meets the horizon, people never stopped whispering about that one night in Texas when everything changed. The younger generation grew up hearing pieces of the tale, half memory, half myth. Some swore their fathers had ridden in that convoy. Others said they saw the fires from miles away, lighting up the sky like dawn. For them, the reckoning wasn't history, it was inheritance. There was even talk of a second ride. Not a war, not another reckoning, something different. A pilgrimage. Every spring, small groups of riders from all across the country would head south, retracing the supposed routes of the original raid. They didn't talk about vengeance or violence. They brought food, supplies, blankets for towns that had been forgotten by both the government and the cartels. No banners, no speeches, just quiet men on old bikes delivering what they could. Locals started calling them the Silent Riders, and though no one ever claimed to lead them, people noticed a familiar mark carved into some of the bikes: a small winged skull worn almost smooth by time. The roads themselves began to change too. The Texas highways, once riddled with potholes and neglect, started to see care again. Some of that was state funding, sure, but some of it wasn't. Counties reported anonymous donations for repairs, all transferred through shell companies with names like Desert Haven Logistics or AFE Industries. The pattern was clear to anyone who looked close enough. The road was being cared for, and maybe that was the real ending of the Texas Reckoning. Not the fire, not the myth, but the rebuilding that came after. In the city of Austin, a group of university students started a digital archive called The Road Remembered. It collected every traceable mention of the reckoning: interviews, leaked reports, even forum posts that had been deleted years earlier. They wanted to treat it as cultural anthropology, a study of how legends form in the modern world. One entry in their database stood out: an audio file labeled Final Ride, Track 03. No one knew where it came from. The recording was simple: just the sound of engines, a long stretch of desert wind, and a single voice humming an old blues tune. After 30 seconds, the voice said quietly, "Keep your word, keep your wheels turning." And then it cut to static. Voice analysis came back with a 98% match: Charles Pee Wee Goldsmith. If it was really him, that meant he'd lived long enough to see his legend become something greater than himself, something alive, something that no one could erase. A journalist from El Paso once wrote that the Texas Reckoning was the moment America's lost honor stood up, dusted off its jacket, and rode again. He was mocked for it at the time, called naive, romantic, nostalgic. But looking back now, it doesn't sound so naive. Because something did shift that year, not just in Texas, but everywhere. Communities began talking more about self-reliance, about accountability, about loyalty. Not the performative kind that lives on slogans and politics, but the quiet kind. The kind you feel when a stranger stops to help you fix a flat tire on a lonely road, no questions asked. People started to crave simplicity again. Truth over spin, brotherhood over bureaucracy. And maybe that was the legacy Pee Wee left behind. Not a movement, but a memory of what it felt like when people trusted each other. In 2036, on the 12th anniversary of the reckoning, a journalist named Maria Cortez published an essay that finally captured what everyone had been struggling to say for years. She wrote, "The Texas reckoning wasn't about bikers or cartels or secret operations. It was about dignity, about ordinary people reminding the world that justice doesn't always wear a badge and morality doesn't always wait for permission." That essay became required reading in several journalism schools. It wasn't because it had the facts. It didn't. It was because it had the truth, the kind that's too human to measure in data. In the years that followed, small memorials began appearing in unexpected places. A mural on a gas station wall, a sculpture made from rusted motorcycle parts standing near the Rio Grande, even a rest stop plaque with no name, just 3 words: respect, loyalty, honor. Every November, riders from across the country gather in silence along the border highway. No music, no speeches, just engines idling in unison as the sun goes down. They call it the Vigil. And when the light fades, someone always rings a bell. 29 times. One for each year Pee Wee rode with the Angels. One for each man believed to have joined him in that final ride. After the last chime, the bikes start up again and roll north into the night. No destination, no explanation, just the road. And that's the thing about the reckoning. It was never really about who did it, or how, or even if it happened exactly the way people say. It was about what it made people believe again. Belief in loyalty, belief in courage, belief that even in a world run by greed and fear, there are still men who will stand up when no one else will. Maybe Pee Wee understood something the rest of us forgot, that history is written by those who survive, but legends are written by those who refuse to surrender. The Texas reckoning was never supposed to be about violence. It was about reclamation, taking back the meaning of brotherhood, of honor, of the open road itself. The last known words attributed to Pee Wee were found scribbled on a napkin at a diner off Route 90. It said, "When the road ends, the story starts. Keep it clean, keep it true." No one knows if he wrote it, but it feels like him, and maybe that's enough. Today, when the desert wind picks up and the sun sets red over the Texas horizon, some say you can still hear the faint rumble of engines far in the distance. A sound carried by time, not of ghosts, but of guardians. Because legends like that don't fade away. They become part of the land, part of the people, part of the heartbeat of a country that still, deep down, believes in doing what's right when no one's watching. And if you ever find yourself out there, in that endless stretch of heat and dust where history meets myth, stop for a moment. Listen. That sound you hear might just be the road remembering, and the road always remembers.